Hey, what's up, everybody? Time for another game theory community lore discussion kind of video. Remember, if you like the videos, like, sub, silly, comment, share, support the channel if you want. I appreciate it. Thanks. Super like, PayPal, whatever. Christmas present if you want to support. I appreciate it. Thanks. We're going to look at old strategy guides today. And this is just funny because it's just going to prove everything that I've said is correct as usual. It's going to talk about the history of the progression of the community. You know what I mean? It goes along with those footsie videos that I was making recently that the community doesn't even remember what footsies was because they weren't actually alive back then, as I've showed in that, hyper fighting video. It's going to talk about the birth of the Jimmy, what I've talked about in videos, and how Street Fighter progressed, how Jimmys became Jimmys. You're going to see so much shit that just, again, proves all the fucking kind of shit I'm talking about, that I've been talking about. So anyway, we're going to look at different strategies, guys. So we have this, Super Turbo thing right here. And something that you're going to see in all these old kind of rankings for characters, something that I loved about old games, and again, all this stuff is going to continue to talk about stuff that I've talked about, but is that not every character, it shows like, oh, this character's a 9-1 matchup, oh, this is a 9-1 matchup, this is an 8-2 matchup. Like, look at this, you have 7, like that's the best match, 7-3. Like, the community was not so fucking like, oh, this matchup is completely unwinnable. It's just like major advantage, right? This character's at the advantage. And that's what I've always said, one of the things that annoyed me about Super Turbo and everything like that is because, and I always say it's funny because, again, people are going to think I'm sucking my dick or something, or the haters do, right? But people got to remember, even when I came back, quotation marks, came back, so to speak, and I was playing on GGPO, no practice, anything like that, years without playing. When I went back and played Super Turbo, you could go see on like Discords and different forums, like I was beating people, unless they were the very best of Super Turbo, at the time, I was beating them. Like, people used to think that I was one of Damn Dive's fake accounts. I remember reading shit that, people used to post like, oh, the best old reviews on like GGPO or this kind of stuff. It's like ST player, Damn Dive. And then, some people would mention my fake accounts and it's like, that's me. And then I would see some of the people that write their tournament or their rankings for the fucking game, and they'd be like, oh, this is a 8-1 matchup, this is a 9-1 matchup. And I'm like, why are you even fucking listening to this guy? You think this guy's a top player? This guy fucking loses to me with no practice, dude. Fucking insane. But anyway, back in the day, people weren't so exaggeratory, making it like, oh, if I, such like a coping mechanism that if I win this matchup, it must have been a 9-1. You know what I mean? So you always are giving yourself, either you win the matchup and you need to get your dick sucked because it's a 9-1 matchup, you have to, or you lose, so you have like, oh, well, I only have a 1% chance of winning or a 10% chance. Like back in the day, even though you have counter characters and advantages, people didn't say matches were over 7-3, you know what I mean? But I think when you look at this, and I've talked about this before, even in old videos, like M. Bison was actually considered the top tier. So you might look at this, I think when you look at this tier list and you see characters like, oh, Vega's always been good, Balor's always been good, Dawson's always been good. There's not a lot of weird stuff that sticks out to you, probably, other than that Chun-Li is probably pretty low. Maybe you think M. Bison is pretty high, and we're going to talk more about this kind of stuff too. Even here you have things always talking about, Sagat's like, just pick old Sagat. And there's this idea that newer school players, and this is something we're going to talk about as we look at these strategy guides, that newer school players are so much better than old school players and all this kind of shit, right? And I've always said before, the new school player, right, they knew all these option selects, because we didn't talk about option selects back in the day, you know what I mean? They knew all these kind of like, things that you would lab, so to speak, right? Oh, I got to practice my option select, all that kind of stuff back in the day. But you got to remember, if you were actually playing Street Fighter back then, unless you had solid fundamental skills, you would never be able to fucking practice your option selects, your big combos, which we're also going to show here, which you're going to see, that's what I'm saying. So it's like, even when I would play Super Turbo back then, it's like, dude, these guys could get beat by just simple, regular, old school Street Fighter fundamental kind of stuff, right? All your option select stuff didn't matter if you can't actually start it. Your combo doesn't matter unless you can actually fucking hit me in the first place, right? And that's not to say that there's been no progression of games, because obviously you think about, and even E Honda isn't that bad in this list right here, but think characters like Ihan the T-Hawk, we didn't talk about option selects back then, but obviously that has helped progress the character, so to speak, right? But, what are some other things when I was looking at this one that kind of stood out to me? I just want to show this too, because I've talked about this before. You got guys like Mike Watson, legend dude. Something that I've talked about before in old school Street Fighter that unfortunately, even when I've talked about making my Street Fighter, if I was going to, I would have counter hits, but I've said that I don't think I would have jump in attacks. I actually do counter hit stun, and I've specifically said that because in old school Street Fighter, there's this idea that kind of like a beauty of it, of really like doing early attacks. And if you do the early attack, you have to watch out for the throw, all that kind of stuff. And you see things like that because like, Guile's Duck Fierce, very strong, beats a lot of different things. So you might have to do your attack early, right? And it's not like if you do your attack early and you beat Guile's Duck Fierce, you know what I mean, that you're automatically gonna get a combo because there's not a counter hit. So then you have to worry about being thrown right when you land. There's that kind of mix-up. But we have this kind of thing here, Mike Watson just doing a Duck Strong, you know what I mean? Even though Ken would have done a early jump fierce to beat that, I'm trying to think, what are some other things I want to show that's going to be hopefully interesting to you? Let's look at this Street Fighter. Look at this tier list, right? Again, got characters like Balrog. I say, a lot of these characters, look at this. Even back then, like, don't pick new Sagat, just pick old Sagat, right? This idea that like old school players are fucking retarded or something and didn't know anything. And again, you got characters like, wow, Chun-Li's probably pretty low on this list, right? You know what I mean? But this idea that like old school players are archaic and not good or something like that is pretty stupid, right? Because even though, again, games have progressed, right? But you know what I mean? If you don't have solid fundamentals, you're not going to be able to do anything in the first place. There's still a pretty sort of solid fundamental knowledge of, oh, this is probably good. This is probably bad, right? I'm going to show some other stuff. What did I have in here? We got some Super Turbo stuff. What is this? I just like, people say I call things stupid names. Like, look at some of the stupid names people called stuff back in the day. Forward crossing wreck-a-wreck. This was considered an expert combo. And this is something, I've talked about before too. Expert combo. You think that's an expert combo? What are some other funny names they have for things? Dashing Strong Red Blaze. Expert. Cancel Christmas combo. Right? People... You so crazy dash cheap, right? And I like how they give like different names and how hard the combo is and stuff like that. High Hurricane Head Basher, forward crazy kicks, neck kick supervise. There's some combos like Crazy Dragon Dancer Flamer, shit like that. This is something when you look at this kind of shit and you read this like cheap factor and annoyance factor, all this kind of stuff, you got to realize, dude, back in the day. And I've said this before, the Jimmies don't, as fighting games progressed, and I've made so many videos about this, the nerd got mad that simple things had such an influence on the match, right? And when you look at these old strategy guides, you see quotation marks, simple things. Ken's knee bash, wow, it's a 10, it's an 8, it's so annoying, it's so simple. You know what I mean? And Jimmy's, so to speak, got mad that, oh, well, these combos, I'm doing so much for the combo. This should be harder. This should have like a bigger influence on the match, right? These things that are simple should not have such a big influence on the match. So combos started becoming bigger in Street Fighter, right? But then people realize, oh, fuck, well, I can't even do the combo. The combo is so hard. So like, oh, fuck, well, this isn't fair. Let's make the combos easier. You know what I mean? Like, people are always coming up with an excuse. And, when you read some of these things, and some of the player interviews, they're childish sounding, right? And from a certain perspective, you could say, well, a lot of the people winning back then were teenagers. And they weren't the nerdy teenager, right? People get mad, though. Clayton talks and weird talk. Clayton, I've always said, I'm not like a frame data person. People back in the day weren't frame data people either. The way that people talk about Street Fighter is not how you talked about Street Fighter back in the day. And I always talked about that, This idea that, you know, just because you're a nerd, you deserve to be good at a video game has never been the case, right? Again, if you look at some of the interviews and stuff, like, people sound like fucking retards, just like people probably think I sound like a fucking retard half the time, right? They sound silly and childish, and because from a certain perspective, they were, you know, not really children, but, you know, teenagers, right? Just like a lot of the people you see writing these strategy guides, they were teenagers. I was a kid at the time, you know, I was younger, but, you know, people didn't talk about like, oh, this is plus here, this is this plus here, this blah, blah, blah. You're like, oh, this is so cheap, this does this, because, well, it's like, don't overcomplicate it, this is what it does. But then you had that nerdy person who would be like, oh, well, you know, I don't like that. You know, I'm a nerd. I'm the real nerd. You're a teenager, dude. You're surfer boy Ryu, Clayton. You know, whatever the fuck they were calling me back then. Oh, you're a little surfer boy. Well, I'm trying to look at the Dragon Flamer. Standing Flamer Dragon Dazer. And people say Clayton calls shit stupid shit, right? You know what I mean? This is how you just, well, okay, I don't know. I've never heard anyone say Standing Flaming Dragon Dazer, but you get the idea. Nerds weren't the people, so to speak, that were playing Street Fighter or good at it, so to speak, right? You know, and a good example would be something like this. Like, let's look at the Street Fighter Alpha strategy guide, right? And this is something funny because when I've talked about Street Fighter Alpha, and I've always said the game has such a bizarre lure in it, you know, the history of the game. People talk about like, oh, you know, everyone hated this game because guy just automatically re-dizzies you and all this kind of stuff. Oh, blah, blah, blah. It's like, what game are you playing? Are you playing like the very first version of the Japanese version that was not even, you know, in America or something like that? You know, what are you talking about? Like, I was alive back then. People weren't doing all this kind of shit that you're talking about, right? And we even look at the strategy guide here, like Mike Watson, look at this. We got the roll trap. We know that shit. John Choi. It's not like there's not good people making the strategy guide, right? You know what I mean? They're talking about, you know, stuff that's good. So let's look at this. Let's look at this though. And this is what the kind of shit I'm talking about. Guy. Let's look at Guy. What do we have here? Shit. How do I work this thing? Again, look at this. Expert. His main, what would you think is just a regular combo, is considered a expert combo. Expert. Re-dizzy crescent kick combo. Expert. It's so hard. You know what So, again, video games have, oh, expert. These are expert combos. But this is kind of funny too. I just like to show this too, because this made me laugh. Where's this shit? So this strategy guide that's, you know, by people that like have played the game, guess what? Where's Guy? Wow, Guy's actually at the bottom half. So you're telling me that all these people that tell fake stories about how Street Fighter was back then, oh, Guy was always the best, Birdie was always the worst. And it's like, I remember these stuff. People didn't talk about stuff like that. You know what I mean? And it's like a lot of people, you would see something like, oh, some random guy would go to the arcade. Oh yeah, Guy, you know, Guy has this like re-dizzy combo, dude. I'm so good. You fucking can't even hit me. First of all, you probably can't even do the combo because most people were not doing all these combos that even if you see them in a strategy guide because they weren't fucking good. You know what I mean? Second of all, you don't have the fundamentals to even land this shit. And again, I like these strategy guys because again, it's like not everything's just like some unwinnable matchup. You know what I mean? And it's like, what are you talking about? Now, of course, this isn't to say, and this is why I've always said too, when you hear me talk about when I make my own tier list, I often say this character is the best character in the game. This character feels the cheapest, right? And that's because I do think there's an idea, and of course there is an optimal way to play a game, right? But you know, you hear a thing like look at this. Where's like say, oh my god, just like doing an attack into bush and flip. It feels like it's the cheapest thing in the game. It's the most almost an annoying thing in the game. Why is it an expert? I don't know. Because I don't know why they fucking wrote this shit. You probably think it's insane, right? You know, the things that people thought were hard back in the day. You know, this is hard, blah blah blah, but this is cheap. Because you did simple things that won. Because if you were not good at simple fucking things, you were never gonna have the chance to do the hard thing, right? Does that make sense? And I always say before, you know, because you got, even though these old things like Mike Watson, John Choi, you got to remember, people that were good at games back in the day, they're good now. Well, you know, depending on how much they play, whatever. You know what I mean? Players that maybe you could say, I've used the word competent. If a player is competent in one game, they, at least an old school game where you need more fundamentals, let's say, there's probably a chance that you can be competent at a newer game, right? Like, people get mad at me. They try to say, oh, Clayton, he doesn't play. Oh, blah, blah, when he plays, he wins. You know, it's not fair. How can the evil Clayton, he must be practicing? Well, we don't know. Or whatever the fuck, people are making up weird things. You're just not actually good at video games, dude. You know, video games try to cater. They have this coping thing, you know what I mean? And that's why I try to show some of these combos, because again, people got to realize, again, what have I always said about Street Fighter? People got mad that simple things were so effective. And so they tried to make execution more of a part of games, right? They tried to make combos bigger and bigger, but then guess what? People are like, oh, well, fuck. The more that you need to do a combo to be effective in a game, right? The more these execution things, you know, you need to be effective at a game. Well, fuck, execution is also a skill. And the nerd didn't like that. The Jimmy's like, well, fuck. I couldn't do simple things to win. I thought if we add more quotation marks, complicated things in the game, I would win. But the complicated, again, you see this stuff and it's expert, it's kind of comical, but, you know, you're like, well, fuck. Make combos easier. Make everything easier. Give me this new fucking comeback mechanic, right? You know? Maybe you're just not actually good at these games, right? You know? I don't know. You know, they're just. I just thought, you know, I wish I could find some of the other strategy guides, right? But I saw some of this kind of stuff, and I know the alpha thing is funny because you have people like, oh, you know, Clayton doesn't know what he's talking about. This was always the best thing. Oh, look at see this. They have cheap shit. You know, they have some of the cheap shit in the game, but they're like, guess what? You know, even back then, like I said, I just think it's funny. It's like, 'cause people always say Guy was the best character in the game. Like, what version of the game are you playing? Even the Japanese have fucking Akuma and Rose better than Guy. You know what I mean? It's like, and again, that's not to say that, you know, there's obviously different things. Like, I remember, you know, reading old Japanese stuff and looking at stuff when, you know, I saw why they considered E Honda the best character in Hyper Fighting. You know, the Japanese, you know, they knew shit that I didn't even know about, right? And even this right here, you know, this does not have everything that they probably should, right? You know, there's definitely stuff they're missing for games, but, you know, the idea that, you know, which is actually, that's something else I should show, which I think is funny. Where is this? Where was Rose? I think this is interesting, right? Where is it? This, God, was it here? Yeah, like, look at this. Like, they have stuff like, you know, anti-air, or, I mean, instant overhead stuff, right? So it's not like old school players didn't know shit, right? You know what I mean? It's like, wow, there's like some kind of like, you'd be like, whoa, they knew about that back in the day. Like, and again, I've talked about hyper fighting before, man. I saw some of the stuff the Japanese were doing. Like, I had no idea about that. Like, you know, there's some crazy shit E Honda could do in hyper fighting that I had absolutely no idea about. But, you know, and this is missing some shit too. But, you know, again, the point is that like old school players, like, oh, they would never win, you know, blah, blah. Clayton would never win if he played again. It's like, bro, look at Guilty Gear. I play on fucking broken controllers. You know what I mean? Like, people are so like, you motherfuckers can't even, like, I was beating people. You guys, motherfucker had 12,000 matches trying to say he's a noob. You know what I mean? Like, bro, you guys just aren't that good at the game. You know, like, what would you do? Like, what would you guys do if I actually practiced video games? If I actually practiced video games, if I did not have surgery on my hands, I was just in the hospital getting more shots for nerve damage and all this arthritis and everything, dude. Fucking couldn't even move my left hand again for a while. You know, it's like, dude, I go months and months without fucking playing video games. You know, maybe you're just not good at games, dude. What, like I said, what the fuck would you do if I actually practiced any of this shit? Like, it's ridiculous. Maybe you're just not good. But again, I'm just talking about, you know, because a lot of this stuff kind of talks about and shows the stuff I'm talking about. But anyway. Remember, if you like the videos, like, sub, silly, comment, share, support the channel. I appreciate it. Thanks. The end.